the recording is getting started. So, okay, we'll go ahead and start with introductions. And so, hi, my name is Brandon Andrews. I'm the San Juan County Parks and Fair Director, which is why I get to wear shirts to work with little watermelons on them because we have a watermelon eating contest and fair. So it feels like it's work attire, right? I think so. And I'll let my colleague introduce herself.
Hi everybody, I'm Gabrielle Conway. I go by Gabe. I am the Projects and Grant Coordinator for our department, and I support our fair events. So we really enjoy our department and what we offer the community. So we're really excited about this program.
Excellent. And so, yeah, we are your program staff, and also just like a huge vote of appreciation to Jane Fuller, who is San Juan County Council member for District 3. And in the next year, Jane will actually be the liaison to the Cultural Access Review Board program. And so I invited her because I think this is a really great way to learn about all the nitty gritty. So if all this information is hopefully useful enough for grant applicants, it should also hopefully give her a really nice primer on what to expect out of this program and just feeling like she's got a good handle on that as we get going. So she's mostly here to just kind of like watch and be, like anyone else. And so really appreciate you popping in, Jane. And all right, so kind of how most of this is going to go here in a moment, I'm going to start sharing my screen. And I figure we'll walk this through like any applicant would. And let's get started. And so that starts with the website. So if I'm anyone else, I'm going to look up San Juan County Cultural Access, right? That is where you're probably to start. What you're looking for is the second link here, this first one for program proposal. I don't know why that's still online. Days ago, I archived that page because it was really meant when this was proposed and council was considering this measure. So we're really looking for the second link here, Cultural Access San Juans. And so this will bring you to the homepage for the program. And let's just kind of walk through some kind of key areas. Up here on the right, you're going to find contact information for Gabriel, who's taking care of the day-to-day elements of this program, and myself. But we are both here to support all applicants and what will soon to be awardees for this grant program through that process to make sure that it's successful for everyone. Over here, we've got some key dates. We started accepting applications back on January 5th. I've never been part of a grant program in which an application was submitted on the day that it opened, so we didn't expect that. But that is when it opened. We have been doing these application support meetings this past Saturday, yesterday, and of course this evening. And then the next big key date is going to be that February 16th, 2026. That is when applications close at 5 p.m. So looks like we've got about almost 6 weeks there for folks to be able to think about what they're looking forward to in this grant application, putting together support materials, and hopefully have lots of time to put that together, get a hold of us, making we're here to support folks all along the way. So here's kind of your key dates. And so when we get here, what is cultural access? So in December 2024, the San Juan County Council passed a 1/10 of 1% sales tax to support cultural access in San Juan County. When you look at the state law that enabled this program, it is first as an economic driver, recognizing the work of the cultural sector. And the cultural sector is the arts, it's sciences, physical science, life sciences, and we're going to talk about that more. It's about heritage organizations, cultural organizations, and how those are economic drivers. And so it's first seen as an economic driver, and it's to help support more programming and access to programming in the areas where these programs exist. And so that was passed then, but the new tax did not start collection until April 1st. So beginning in Q2 of 2025. So in this first grant cycle, we don't have a full years of collection. We have 3/4 of a year collection, which is why we'll talk about this more here in a moment. There are 2 grant pathways planned out for this program, but in this first year, since we don't have a full year's collection, we're only operating one of those grant pathways that everyone can apply for. So what were some of the key funding goals? The first thing that the legislature said that you have to do with these funds is you have to support the schools. And so the San Juan County Council elected to earmark 20% of all funds for the school districts. split amongst, Orcas, Lopez, Shaw, and San Juan Island school districts. And that is a much higher percentage than other places do. And I think it was really the foresight of council to say, our school districts are struggling. We need to make sure that they're supported so we're not cutting mandatory services. And so that is where that first 20% goes. After that, an additional 8% goes towards transportation. So a lot of, so this program is about making programming happening. So whether it's schools going out in field trips or these kind of nonprofits coming into the classroom to do learning there, it's to support those things. And so with this transportation dollars, with ferry fee, it could support ferry cost, school buses, school bus drivers, substitute teachers, really trying to take the edge off of those things to make this as easy as possible for school districts. And then the other key funding goal was grant opportunities to nonprofits. So the rest of those funds, beginning next year, both of these things will be live. So the first one is for comprehensive organizational support, which is for organizations that do programming year round, have been around for a few years, and they're a little bit more stable. The impact grants, which is the only grant pathway available this year due to that, limited 3/4 of funding, is for smaller organizations, one-off events, a small series of events that aren't year round. And that is how that is imagined. And the other difference between these things is that these impact grants do require a 50% match. And so I have some copy to update on this, and I'll have done here shortly, because it's not a one-to-one match. That's my apologies. We've been going through lots of draft stuff, and you start finding all the things that you missed in the last draft. And so that's definitely on me. Before I go home this evening, I will get that updated. So back to the website here. You got two big buttons here: funding opportunities and resources. Want to make it simple and kind of point you right where you needed to go. And so here are the frequently asked questions. What is cultural access? I've kind of talked about that. Where does the money come from? How can it be used? So I talked about the schools, the transportation, and the grants. We are grateful that a small amount of this can be retained towards administering this program, to make sure that people have, to develop those materials and guidelines and run this program, develop those contracts and review progress reports and get money out to these organizations. And so really grateful for not having an unfunded mandate. And so how do you apply for grant? Right here in funding opportunities. And it talks a little bit more about how does this benefit? What other, municipalities have these kinds of programs if you're interested about cultural access at large throughout Washington state. But let's talk about what folks might be really interested in. Funding opportunities and additional resources. You'll also find that here on the left-hand side of the website. So let's go here to funding opportunities, and this is where we're going to spend most of our time this evening. Oh, look at our nice friends at the Lopez Center for the Community and the Arts having a nice event. That's so nice. You remember these days when it was like sunny past 6 o'clock? That was nice. But we're going to get there. We're on our way. We're on our way. So just a reminder, because I want to make sure that it's abundantly clear that in the first year, all applicants will follow the impact funding pathway. And so how to apply? The first thing is, and this is called out by that state legislature, is that about your mission. Your organization's primary purpose, meaning your stated mission in the majority of your activities, must be to advance and preserve the arts, culture, heritage, and/or science. And so if that is not what your nonprofit does, you are not eligible as an organization. There is a way that if you have a project, a program that you're interested in, there's still a way there. And we're gonna talk about that through fiscal sponsorship. Next up, you have to be a nonprofit in the state of Washington. Location, you have to be based in San Juan County, or you can be based outside of San Juan County, but the majority of your services are provided within San Juan County. And lastly, you have to do some sort of programming, because that's really what this is about. It's doing programs for the general public, for youth, and really pushing that forward. And so that is kind of your basic components of eligibility. And so this little table here, I hope is helpful, mostly for next year when there are two grants to apply for, because you can only apply for one when they're both live. You can either apply for comprehensive if you're eligible, or impact if you're eligible, but you can't apply for both in 2027. And so that kind of, I talked about, having been a longer year, longer establishment of doing programming. You're doing that programming year round, and that impact funding only requires one public program per year. That match required, that 50% match that I talked about with no match. And so that is just and for future years, because we want to build out as many of these materials as soon as possible. That way it doesn't feel like it's new information coming out next year, and that we're clear about what the difference of these things are coming forward. So application support, you're here at the last webinar. And so that's what we will post the recordings for these. And of course, we are here to work with people one-on-one throughout this entire process. So let's kind of talk about the documents that you'll be spending time in. And so this first one here is the guidelines document. And this is most of what you're after. This is where we're going to really talk about what you can use money for, key dates, all that other stuff. And so I'm going to do my best not to repeat elements that we've already talked about, but kind of point out where they're at in the document as we go through it. So, that application deadline, 5 p.m., Monday, February 16th, rather. And this explains what cultural access is, as I've already explained this evening. Impact funding is, a 1-year program for smaller organizations like I talked about. Comprehensive funding begins in 2027. The funding cycle might be important to folks is that it's runs from July 1 to June 30. And the reason that was decided was because, the legislator said the first funds go to the schools. And so this funding cycle is really meant to tie up with more of the school's budgetary calendar so that they can be doing planning further out. As someone who's been on the board for a nonprofit, I have found that nonprofits are generally much more flexible in when and how they plan for money. Just grateful that it has come in. So when folks complete their applications, you're going to email it to culturalaccess@sanjuancountywa.gov. And there's that link to the website where we started at. And so here's your application timeline. Talked about those deadlines being February 16th. And so between February 16th and sometime ideally in mid-April, we will have these grant applications scored and reviewed, and I'm going to talk about who does that and what that looks like here shortly. But hopefully by mid-April, so ideally by May 1st, we have let folks know who has been awarded, and then over the months of May and June, get those materials together and your contract sorted out and reviewed and signed. That way, when July 1 comes around, we are off and running in our first funded cycle. So we have our table of contents here. Great opportunity to give a kudos to Gabriel because we work on these materials together, and then she takes care of managing all of those edits and formatting. And I don't know about you, but if you've ever done something in Word or Adobe and you've deleted something and all of a sudden a page is missing, or why is there a blank page in between everything else? And why can't I get rid of the blank page? She went through that tedium, and I am endlessly grateful for her work. And again, we are your staff contact for this program. We talked about those funding goals, about supporting programs in arts, culture, heritage, and science, and increasing programming, introducing barriers to getting there. And so let's talk about the categories. And so when we talked about when your organization needs to, your stated mission statement needs to fit about supporting those areas, here's where we kind of broaden those definitions. So these definitions weren't developed to be limiting, but hopefully to make it easier about how your organization might fit into these categories. So an arts organization provides programming across one or more of its following artistic fields: design, folk and traditional arts, creative placemaking, dance, literary arts, multidisciplinary arts, music, media arts, theater, visual arts. A culture organization means an organization that provides public programming focused on a particular group that shares a common and immutable personal identity trait that seeks to advance or preserve the traditions, language, knowledge, skills, cuisine, or achievements of a group. Heritage means an organization that provides programming that focuses on the identification, documentation, exhibition, interpretation, and/or preservation of the past, including the people, places, events, and physical spaces of any community of people. And science organization means an organization that provides programming across one or more of the following scientific fields: physical sciences, life sciences, natural sciences, earth and space sciences, engineering, technology, and work that applies the scientific method or engineering design cycles. So hopefully when you're thinking about your nonprofit, you see how you exist in here, that your stated mission and the majority of your activities line up somewhere here. Because if so, you're likely an eligible candidate for cultural access funds. So about impact funding, again, I don't want to overstate it, but it's that 1-year funding. The funding amount is a minimum of $2,500 and a maximum of $25,000 for that year. And so that match requirement is where we're talking about that 50% of your proposed budget. But as someone who's worked in nonprofits and has been a volunteer, I understand how we don't want this to be a barrier. And so there are lots of ways to really get there, and I don't think anyone's really going to have an issue with it. Is you can use cash or donated time and materials or a combination. And I know that nonprofits run on volunteer time, and those hours stack up pretty quickly. But you can also use projected income from other grants, other fundraising, and earned income. And so hopefully, as we kind of get into that budget proposal form, you'll see that that's really not meant to be a barrier for those things. So we talked about your eligibility, about the mission and your nonprofit status, location, and that you have to do programs. Exclusions from eligibility. This is just straight from the state law that enables this program. It cannot go towards the state or any of its political subdivisions. So that means junior taxing districts are ineligible for these funds. The town of Friday Harbor is ineligible for these funds. Like we as the county fair, like is a culture and a heritage event, but because we are a political subdivision of the state, we cannot receive these funds for programming. We can retain that little bit to administer the program, but not for the aims of expanding programming. We also can't give any of these funds to radio or television broadcasting networks or stations, cable communication systems, internet-based communication venture service, newspaper, or magazines. So I don't really know the conversation about why those things aren't there, and my assumption is that it's largely towards the inability to do programming in those ways. So what funds may be used for? One of the things that I really appreciate about how the legislature set up this program is that it can pay for boring things. We love grants to pay for boring things because so often they want to pay for the stuff, for the thing, and not really how you move it all forward. But if what you're applying for is in service to making programming happen, it's an eligible fund. And so here are some examples. It can be staffing costs. It can be insurance and legal fees. You can use it for capital improvements, reduce tuition. And if you're doing those kinds of things to make these types of things happen over here in support of presentations, workshops, exhibitions, festivals, educational programs, ADA accommodations, and ASL interpretation, extended hours of services, all of those things make those things possible. And so that's really, really exciting to me. What can it not support? And again, this is stuff that's out of that state legislature confinement, is that it can't be for programming outside of San Juan County boundaries. Work that is commercial in nature, you can't use it for charitable fundraisers or galas, can't use it for debt service or endowment building. It can't be about specific political agendas or religious practices, and it can't be exclusively for students outside of San Juan County. You can't use it to pay a member of the Cultural Access Review Board or a San Juan County employee. So as much as you are dying to give me your money from your grant, I can't take it and I won't. And of course, those same kinds of organizations, radio, broadcasting, magazines, again, are not eligible to support those kinds of organizations or functions. So application supports, we kind of talked about this earlier. We're in one of those workshops now. We're happy to work with you in one-on-one with staff. And of course, email us about anything. This next section you're going to find is kind of a big boilerplate, maybe not boilerplate, but really what it means is that when this program was created and enacted, it was with the idea that San Juan County wanted to bolster this kind of programming around the county, but we can't necessarily do it ourselves. And so we're partnering with these organizations in a contract for services. And so San Juan County is contracting with your organization to make sure that we are fulfilling the mission of this program. So, it's about contracts for service and reporting and payment phases. And we'll talk a little bit about that more in detail here in a moment. Requirements for funded organizations. And we're really kind of just talking about insurance. And again, hopefully folks don't see this as a barrier to participation or eligibility, because if you're operating as a nonprofit, you probably have these things. So it's just general liability insurance. You probably already have that nonprofit. This one was a new one for me, which is abuse and molestation insurance. And this is only needed if your programming is exclusively for youths or exclusively for seniors or exclusively with people with disabilities. But if you're doing a general public audience program, that is not required. But if you're going to do it specifically with one of those groups, this type of insurance is going to be required. And then kind of the same thing you would anticipate, auto insurance. If you're using an owned, leased, or rented automobile to transport people for your programming. if you are providing transportation for them in one of those vehicles, auto insurance will be needed. Same thing if you're taking them out on a boat. You're going to need marine liability. And of course, if you've got employees, you're going to have workers' compensation. So it really should be all of the things that you're, currently carrying for the types of activities that you do. And of course, we're going to require folks to be in compliance with the federal government and Washington State and San Juan County. You have to have that business license that we talked about. And one of the things here is the funding acknowledgement. So if these funds are supporting that programming, when you are promoting or acknowledging, going through that programming and how you're advertising it, that there is an acknowledgement of the Cultural Access San Juan's element that is making that program possible. And we'll provide a communications guideline and toolkit. And it'll be pretty simple. It's mostly, access to some San Juan County logos. We don't want to make this more difficult for folks. So general public programs, equity and access. So we've talked about, supporting programming and also making programming more accessible. And so equity and access, I think very quickly and often gets caught up very quickly in the umbrella of DEI. And I think that's a lot of the ways that people have heard about these terms or understand them. And so I want to talk about the different ways that we're talking about equity and access in this program. And so the first one is acceptance-based access. And that's pretty much in that DEI umbrella that you're familiar with. It's just making sure that whoever comes to your program is welcome and that diversity is everything. And it is not just physical characteristics. When we look here in the second bullet point, it's, that could include folks that are Black, Indigenous, people of color, LGBTQIA+, people speak different languages, people different education or experience, different levels of income, different ages, is that, we are a rich tapestry in that whoever shows up is feeling welcomed in those things. But let's talk about the areas that maybe people don't think about as much that are centered around equity and access to what these programs are doing. Communications access is about how you're promoting your program. Are you only promoting your program through a physical newsletter to supporters of your nonprofit or to only donors? Or is it only on your website? What are you doing to make sure that gets out there as widely as possible? Disability access. What are we doing for physical infrastructure? Do we need interpretive services? Do we need audio, describing devices? These can pay for those things as part of that. Financial access. What can we do to reduce the cost of tickets with these grant funds? What can we do to eliminate ticket costs, whether it's for the entire program or a subset? What can we do to make sure that, finances are not a barrier for the people of San Juan County to come to this programming? Geographic access. We are islands, and what does that look like? And if I want to attend, someone who's in Friday Harbor and I want to come to an event on Lopez, do I need to get myself all the way down to the Grange? Like how are we partnering with other facilities to make that easier around more common access points? These are just things to be considering and addressing if you can, because not everything can. And so I don't want anyone to feel like when you're putting together your application that you've got to check every single one of these boxes. But the more that we can be actively thinking about these things, like, high tides lift all boats. And that's just, it's better for everyone. Internet-based access. As someone who runs the county fair with an online entry form, I hear a lot about folks who are older and don't use the internet. What is their ability to participate? And for the fair, we use paper entry forms for those who really don't want to do it online. And so we want to meet everyone right where they're at. And public access. So lots to thumb through there when you're ready. Youth education programs. This is the part that is about schools. And so it may not be eligible. So, or, speak too deeply to what your interest may be, depending on who you are. And so these cultural access in public schools, this is about doing field trips. This is about getting kids that kind of learning experience into the classroom. It can also be used for professional development of teachers. And we're going to pay for, that to make that happen. That's where those first dollars go through to make sure that that's possible. Now, in trying to make things as easy to navigate as possible in the ways that we could think of, we wanted to make sure that when you're going through these guidelines, that things look similar. So what we did is we actually kind of listed the application here so that you can go back and re-reference items, but it's also, we don't want to receive a 28-page document back. So we've separated out the application as you see it in the guidelines form here. And so let's go over the application itself. And again, we want to try to make this reasonably accessible to folks. And so when you're talking here about your organizational background, what's your published mission statement? 50 words. Tell us about your organization. And by the time you fill out these 2 prompts, 100 words isn't a whole lot. We're not looking for dissertations here, but enough clear information that, a clear indicator. Are you eligible for these funds? And is your programming what this is, meant to be doing? Proposal information, 50 words max. It could be a statement about how you plan to strengthen or grow your organization's internal capacity and how that will help serve the program goals or cover certain operating expenses. It's not a philosophical statement about your organization's work. It is, what are you using these monies to do? And this next section is about contract deliverables. We're going to list 2 to 4 key program deliverables for each quarter if that's applicable. Because even if you're not doing year-round programming, we run the county fair, and it's, a lot of folks think about it as 4 days, but for us, we know that this is a year-round effort. And so let's say you're doing a music festival in the middle of Shaw Island, and it's about to be a really great time. We know that, in quarter 1, it might be about organizing your production elements. In quarter 2 is the execution of the event. Quarter 3 is your after action review and making adjustments for the next year. Like there's lots that can really be captured there. And again, it's meant to be kind of bullet pointed, creation and public release of 4 short videos, or that could be 4 short press releases, whatever that may be. What are the elements, measurable elements that we can use as contract deliverables when we get you all set up? So now we're talking about your program proposal. What will you create and present with this funding during the next cycle? Trying these categories here about capacity and feasibility, we're asking, we wanted to limit to like asking 3 questions per area. And so by the time you do that, that'll quickly add up to 300 word minimum or so. Just make sure folks don't shortchange themselves, but also, again, not looking for that thesis about these things. And then proposal budget. We're going to pull up a spreadsheet here in a moment that we've got built into the website for you to use to hopefully make that pretty easy. And where you're going to project out expenses and income, and it's got formulas built in. It should be pretty easy for folks, is my hope. So that's the grant application. So hopefully that feels pretty good.
Yeah, and Brandon, if you want to talk about volunteer hours, that number that we came up with, that is what they need to use.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we talk here about projected income, we know that these nonprofits run on volunteer time, is that volunteer hours might be calculated at $40.28 per hour. And so that is a third-party nonprofit organization that is about supporting volunteers and studies the value of volunteer work in organizations. And this is their number for 2026. And the review process. So who is looking at your application and what should you know? So as part of this effort, the council has established the Cultural Access Review Board, or CARB, as we're lovingly referring to it these days. And that is going to be a 5-member review board that will look through your criteria using a 10-point scale, really looking to rank these things. One of the things that's important is that we do want to note that full funding is not, the request amount is not guaranteed. Part of that could be eligibility of programming, whether that doesn't fit the confines. It could be that there's more for anyone who applies for like lodging tax. We always know that there's a much bigger ask than there are available funds, which is the most likely scenario for talking about this. But we're going to do the best that we can to get those out there and supported. So yeah, here's some review criteria, and it really just kind of speaks to the heart of what that application shows. We're in these workshops, one-on-one support, and we'll talk a little bit about reporting requirements and payment phases. And so you're gonna do reporting in the months in which you have contract deliverables or your programming is occurring. And again, want to make this easy. And I'll actually pull up the physical expulsion, but it's like, date, what was your name? Did you collaborate with anyone? Where did this happen? Was it for the general public or for the youth? How many people were there and was it free? I think most of those questions you'll actually know the answers to before the program occurs, and then you're really kind of doing a quick working your number clicker as quickly as you can. And you're gonna describe your work over the last quarter and some supporting materials, some photos, posters, videos if you can, those things. And then we'll work on getting your invoice in and money out to pay you for the services of which you've completed, which will be really, really exciting. So this is that guidelines document. So I know it feels long, but I hope it comes across as not too overly cumbersome. So let's look at that budget form. And I did not do what I was supposed to today. And so can I need to adjust this, and it's not working. So I'm going to fix this after this little webinar here. But here is your blank budget workbook. So it's, what are your projected expenses in dollars, fees to presenters? Tried to like break it down and provide prompts so that you don't, particularly for smaller nonprofits that aren't doing this a whole lot. I understand that people don't have grant writers. We work on a lot of grants, and so we try to take our own experience of like what makes a good application worthwhile, and what are we reporting, like what it feels onerous and not really useful in what we're telling back to that requesting agency. So we try to keep it as compact as possible, but also understanding that these are public funds. They need to be safeguarded to ensure that they're fulfilling their purpose as appropriate. So you're gonna put in some projected expenses here and your income, whether that's earned from like ticket sales, you have your own cash, you're doing some fundraising. Here's your volunteer time, which will be really great. And so you'll have your total dollar here of your expenses. And I need to fix this because this amount should be half of the projected expenses, not one for one, half over here to make that easier. Because again, we don't want this match to be cumbersome. So that is that little worksheet there. And fiscal sponsorship form. I had a really great phone call today with someone who had an idea of doing a public history project with QR codes and getting it back. And so, but they don't have an eligible nonprofit. You are still able to pursue your idea. And so, but what that takes is is this fiscal sponsorship program over here. And really what that means is that an eligible nonprofit signs up to be legally and fiscally responsible for managing that project. So, to be fair, that's a bit of an ask of an organization, but this does allow that 10% of the project costs, here we go, fees charged by the fiscal sponsor to cover administrative fees may not exceed 10% of any funding contract. So they can keep some funds back, and it's not just a favor, that there's actually an opportunity for them to make sure that they're paying for their staff time to sign the contract, to make sure the insurance is there, et cetera. But if you have an eligible project, you can work with a fiscal sponsor who is willing to do this, because the nice thing is that it doesn't count as their application. So they can be a fiscal sponsor for someone who's not eligible. For instance, and I don't know if they're applying, but in past conversations, there is Friends of the Lopez Island Canoe Landings who have done fundraising to support the cost of canoe landings on Lopez Island, but they're not a registered 501c3 or nonprofit. So, but that is, those canoe landings very much are public programming, and the tribes come out and are very welcoming of the community there. And so it's definitely an eligible project. And so they could work with like the Lopez Historical Museum to be the fiscal sponsor to carry that out. And so really we're hoping that the tools are there to, again, remove those barriers, make this as easy as possible. So you'll find information on that here. And then at the bottom, there's an example of a fiscal agreement form there, which basically just states the requirements. And so those are big things. Comprehensive funding guidelines isn't clickable. That'll be loaded up into next year. Gabe, did you have something?
Yeah, I just wanted to add with the fiscal sponsorship, a question we get quite often is if someone can, a 501 nonprofit can apply for their own grant and still be a fiscal sponsor.
Yes,
so
you
you can do both. You can have your own grant and be a fiscal sponsor to help someone else with a grant.
Absolutely. I know I've been talking to people for a very long time, so I'm almost done, I promise. So the last thing we want to go to is resources for funded organizations. And so this is really meant for after you've applied for your grants, you've been awarded, here's where you're going to find some elements that are going to be helpful to you. So this is where you're going to find your quarterly reporting document. And so, right here, just a little, program summary chart, and it's just some instructions on, the narrative, supporting materials, how to include your invoice right there. And so that program chart that, who did you do it for? Who did you do it with? How many people were there? Here's that like name of program. Was it for the general public? Did you do it for a school district? Where did you do it? Again, you're going to know all these things before your program even occurs. Did you collaborate with anyone else who was funded? And of course, when these organizations are funded, we'll put them up on the website for you to be able to access, and we'll send that out with your contract information. Total number of days of programming. People, was it free? Did you do any reduced elements? So hopefully this feels pretty simple, kind of flowing across that spreadsheet. And then we still need to put together a yearly final report, but certainly is not needed at this time. And we need to include those logos and funding acknowledgement elements here. And so, we've still got items in the hopper, but we wanted to make sure that we got everything that people needed to understand the program, apply for the program, and we'll get up and going. And so while folks are applying for grants, we're working on creating the next set of materials that are needed out ahead of us. Same thing for invoicing payments. So in some ways, I hope people find these materials useful. And in some ways, I think Gabriel and I feel, if anyone remembers the old Wallace and Gromit cartoon, when he's on a train, he's just laying track out in front of it. So while we get the rest of these materials made, which will be good into the future, that is currently, I think, how we're feeling here in the office, but really excited to see what our community does with this type of program. So to our friends at the Makers Guild or Mr. Cook, if you have any questions, now is a great time for that. Happy to take any and all of them to kind of clear things up or provide general direction. But if not, no worries. That is certainly an invitation, not a request. And, if you've been delaying dinner and have no questions, now seems like a good time to do that. So if you've got any questions, please let us know.
No, I'm not delaying dinner. That's very good. Thank you very much for the session. I learned a lot, and I'll be pursuing things, trying to find a fiscal sponsor and a nonprofit to work with. And hopefully that can be achieved. Very, very informative. Thank you very much, Brandon.
That's very exciting. Thank you so much, Mr. Cook. Have a good night.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right. And we'll hold just a little bit of space here to see if anyone else has got questions. And if not, we can conclude this evening and look forward to seeing what exciting things people put together.
Yeah, and if you do, after watching this and have time to digest everything, if you do have any further questions, feel free to reach out to us and email us or call and or stop by, and we're happy to help you. Because I know it's a lot, and I know I tend to have think about things and then later on have questions. So if that's the case, feel free to reach out.
Absolutely. All right. Well, I think that'll do it for us then. Thank you all so much for being here this evening. Really look forward to seeing what folks put together and kicking this program off the right way.
Thank you, Brandon and Gabe, especially given the outside office hours that you're consuming in doing this. So really appreciate your time.
Absolutely. All right.
Thank
Well, thank you,
you.
everyone. Have a good night.
Have a good night.